My name is Helen Sterling. At 67, my life has settled into the gentle, predictable rhythms of a coastal southern town. My husband, Robert, passed on nearly a decade ago, leaving behind a silence in our Charleston home that I've learned to fill with the rustle of turning pages, the soft click of knitting needles, and the steady, quiet work of tending my garden. The humidity here can be a trial, but it makes the jasmine and gardenias grow with an abandon that fills the air with a perfume so thick you can almost taste it. Robert used to say my garden was a reflection of my heart, orderly, but with a wild, vibrant life of its own. I live with my elder son, Samuel, his wife, Isabel, and their son, my grandson, Noah. Samuel followed in his father's footsteps, becoming a historical preservationist, a man who finds his purpose in shoring up the foundations of the past. He is quiet and steady, like an old oak. Noah, at 7, is a bright spark of pure energy, a whirlwind of questions and crayon drawings that paper the refrigerator. And Isabel. For years, Isabel was the polished centerpiece of our family. She moved with an effortless grace, her smile always perfectly placed, her home always immaculate. She was, in my eyes, the daughter I never had, the steady hand that kept our little world spinning in its proper orbit. My younger son, Michael, is my wanderer. He chose the skies over the earth, a pilot whose home is a cockpit thousands of feet in the air. His calls are sporadic but cherished, little postcards of sound from distant cities. My story, the story of how the foundations of my own home began to crack, started on a Tuesday morning, thick with the promise of summer heat. Samuel had already left for a site downtown, and the school bus had just rumbled away with Noah. The house was quiet save for the hum of the old refrigerator and the distant sound of the shower running upstairs. "Helen, I'm just hopping in the shower." Isabel's voice, melodious and clear, had drifted down the stairs a few minutes earlier. "Take your time, dear," I'd called back, gathering the breakfast dishes. I was at the sink, my hands immersed in warm, soapy water, when the telephone rang. I dried my hands on my apron, the familiar scent of lavender rising from the fabric, and picked up the receiver. "Mom, just had a moment before takeoff." Michael's voice was a welcome surprise, crackling slightly with the airport's ambient noise. "Wanted to check in." Hearing him always felt like a sudden burst of sunshine. "Michael, darling. How are you? Where are you off to this time?" "London." "It's a straight shot." "Listen, things are fine, but something a bit strange just happened." His tone shifted, losing its easy warmth and taking on a note of puzzlement. "Is Isabel at the house?" I glanced toward the staircase, where the sound of running water was just beginning to fade. "Of course, she is. She's just finishing her shower." I was so certain, so utterly sure of this simple, domestic fact. I had seen her not 20 minutes ago in her favorite linen blouse, the white one with the mother-of-pearl buttons. A long silence stretched over the line, long enough for me to hear the tinny announcement of a boarding call in the background. When Michael spoke again, his voice was low, almost a whisper. "Mom, that's impossible. I have her passport in my hand. She just boarded my flight." I laughed, a small, uncertain sound. It had to be a mistake. "Honey, you must have seen a look-alike. I just spoke with her. She's right here." "No, Mom, it's not a mistake." His voice was firm now, insistent. A gate agent found a passport dropped near the jet bridge. When I looked at it to find the passenger, I froze. The photo, the name. It was Isabel. I double-checked the manifest, then walked down the aisle to her seat. She's in business class, sitting next to some man in a tailored suit. They were holding hands, Mom. His words struck me like a physical blow. Holding hands. My mind reeled, refusing to connect the dots. The Isabel I knew, Samuel's devoted wife, would never. But Michael was not one for dramatics. He was my practical, level-headed son. Just then, the shower upstairs shut off. I heard the creak of the bedroom door, then footsteps on the landing. Helen? Who's on the phone? Isabel's voice floated down, wrapped in its usual sweetness. A wave of panic washed over me. My heart hammered against my ribs. Just an old friend from the garden club, I called back, my voice tight and unnatural. I quickly moved into the living room, turning my back to the hallway as if to shield the conversation. Her damp hair was wrapped in a towel as she peered down from the top of the stairs. I lowered my voice to a frantic whisper. Michael, she's here. I can see her. She just got out of the shower. Are you absolutely certain? His sigh was heavy with frustration and confusion. Mom, I am looking at her right now. Seat 4B. I'm telling you, she is on this plane. My mind was a blank wall. I couldn't reconcile the two realities. I mumbled a hasty goodbye and hung up the phone, my hand trembling so badly I could barely set the receiver back in its cradle. The familiar, sun-drenched living room suddenly felt alien and confining. I sank onto the floral sofa, the one Robert and I had picked out decades ago, and tried to breathe. If Isabel was on that plane, who was the woman upstairs? And if the woman upstairs was Isabel, then who was on her way to London? A few minutes later, she descended the stairs, dressed in a fresh sundress, a pale yellow that complemented her dark hair. Her smile was as bright and untroubled as the morning sun. I'm heading to the farmer's market, Helen. Do you need me to pick up anything? Her voice was the same. Her face was the same. Every detail was perfectly, unnervingly Isabel. I looked at her, searching for a crack in the facade, a hint of the deception Michael's call had implied. I found nothing. Some fresh tomatoes would be lovely, dear, I managed, my throat feeling as dry as dust. She picked up her woven market basket and headed out the door, her light footsteps fading on the cobblestone walk. I watched her go, a storm of doubt raging within me. Michael would not lie. But the evidence of my own eyes was irrefutable. I was left with a chilling question that settled deep in my bones. Was there a secret in this house so profound that I, in my quiet, observant life, had managed to miss it entirely? I sat there for a long time, the stripes of sunlight moving slowly across the floor, feeling as if a stranger had just walked out of my home, and another one was still inside it. The unease planted by Michael's phone call took root in my mind and began to grow, winding its tendrils around every small, ordinary moment. I started to watch Isabel, or the woman I thought was Isabel, with an attention I'd never before paid. I began to notice things, tiny inconsistencies that I had previously dismissed as moods or quirks. I remembered, with a jolt, an afternoon a few months prior. I'd seen her jotting down a grocery list with her right hand, her script a series of elegant, controlled loops. But the very next day, I'd noticed her signing a permission slip for Noah's field trip with her left hand, the letters more rounded, less certain. When did you become ambidextrous, dear? I'd asked lightly. She'd laughed it off. Just trying to keep my brain sharp, Helen. I had smiled and thought nothing more of it. Now, the memory felt like a shard of glass in my mind. That afternoon, after she'd left for the market, Noah came home from school, his backpack thumping against the doorframe. He ran to me for his customary hug. Grandma, look what I did. He proudly presented a piece of paper covered in colorful, wobbly letters. Mommy helped me practice my name yesterday. She held my hand, and it was so neat. He pointed to a perfectly formed Noah at the top of the page. Then his face fell. But this morning, she just told me to do it myself, and she wrote my name for the teacher with her other hand. It looks all messy. He pointed to a second, clumsier signature at the bottom. I smoothed his hair, my heart constricting. Your mommy was probably just in a hurry this morning, sweet boy. But as I looked at the two distinct styles of handwriting, a cold dread crept over me. Noah, in his childlike innocence, was seeing it too. She's so confusing, Grandma, he whispered, his big brown eyes filled with bewilderment. Sometimes she gives me the biggest, squeeziest hugs. And other times she looks at me like she doesn't even know me. His words pierced me. I held him close, trying to shield him from a confusion that I was only just beginning to grasp myself. This wasn't just about handedness, it was about something deeper, a fundamental shift in the way she connected or failed to connect with her own son. The next day, my neighbor Beatrice stopped by to return a pie dish. We stood on the porch, the air thick with the scent of my climbing roses. Beatrice is a practical woman, not given to gossip, but she had a keen eye. "Helen," she began, her brow furrowed slightly. "I don't mean to pry, but is everything all right with Isabel? The other day, she stopped me on the street to ask about my daughter's new baby, just as sweet as can be. But yesterday, I waved to her as she was getting in her car, and she gave me such a cold look, as if I were a complete stranger. It was the oddest thing." I forced a smile, my cheeks aching with the effort. "You know how it is, Beatrice. Busy, a lot on her mind." But as she walked away, her words echoed Noah's. It wasn't my imagination. The woman living in my house presented two different faces to the world, one warm and engaging, the other detached and cold. That evening at dinner, the inconsistency was on full display. This version of Isabel was the warm one. She helped Noah cut his chicken, listened intently as Samuel described a difficult restoration project downtown, and even complimented my cooking with a genuine warmth that made the tension in my shoulders ease slightly. "Samuel, don't forget we have that parent-teacher meeting on Thursday," she reminded him softly, placing a hand on his arm. "I've already cleared my schedule." I watched her, trying to reconcile this loving wife and mother with the woman on Michael's flight, the woman who looked at her own son like a stranger. In my mind, Michael's voice was a constant, haunting whisper, she was holding hands with another man. Just 2 days later, the chill returned. At dinner, Noah accidentally knocked over his glass of milk. It spread in a white pool across the polished wood of the dining table. I immediately stood up. "Oh, it's all right, sweet boy. Accidents happen." But from across the table, Isabel's voice was sharp, brittle as ice. "Noah, for heaven's sake, watch what you're doing. You're so clumsy." The light in Noah's eyes went out. He shrank in his chair, his lower lip trembling. Samuel looked at his wife, his expression a mixture of surprise and disapproval. "Isabel, it was just a glass of milk." "You always take his side," she snapped, her eyes flashing with an unfamiliar anger. "It's no wonder he's so careless." The rest of the meal was eaten in a heavy, suffocating silence. I sat there, my food tasteless in my mouth, watching her. Today, she used her fork in her right hand, but her movements were stiff, her posture rigid. She was a stranger at our table. These were not mere mood swings. This was something else entirely, something fragmented and deeply wrong. After everyone had gone to bed, I couldn't sleep. I went downstairs and took out an old, leather-bound journal Robert had given me years ago. My hand trembled as I opened it to a fresh page. I began to write, not just what I'd seen, but what I felt. Tuesday, Michael's call. Isabel on a flight to London. Isabel at home. How can both be true? Wednesday, Noah noticed the handwriting. Left hand, then right hand. He said she is sometimes a stranger. My heart aches for him. Friday, Beatrice noticed her coldness. It's not just me. Sunday, the spilled milk. Her anger was so out of proportion. This was not the Isabel who married my son. Each entry was a small stone dropped into the deep well of my fear. I didn't know what truth I was searching for, but I knew I could no longer afford to look away. For Samuel, and especially for Noah, I had to understand the woman or women living under my roof. I had to understand the lie. The weight of my suspicions became a constant companion, a heavy cloak I couldn't shrug off. My journal filled with entries, a catalogue of contradictions that painted a portrait of two entirely different women inhabiting the same life. I knew I couldn't carry this burden alone. I needed to talk to someone who knew me, someone whose judgment I trusted implicitly. I needed Beatrice. I called her. Beatrice, could we meet for coffee? There's something I need to talk to you about, and I'd rather not do it at the house. Her voice was instantly warm with concern. Of course, Helen. Is everything all right? You sound troubled. The little cafe on Queen Street in an hour? That cafe had been our sanctuary for over 30 years. We dissected novels for our book club, celebrated our children's successes, and mourned our husbands' passings over countless cups of tea and coffee at its small, wobbly tables. I chose a quiet booth in the back, the worn velvet cool against my skin. I held the warm mug in my hands, trying to absorb its heat, but a chill had settled deep inside me. How could I put words to this impossible situation without sounding like a foolish old woman losing her grip on reality? Beatrice arrived, her kind face etched with worry. She slid into the booth opposite me and reached across the table to cover my hand with hers. Helen, what is it? I've never heard you sound so lost. I took a shaky breath and the story tumbled out. Michael's call, the woman on the plane, the passport, the inconsistencies I'd been documenting. I told her about the 2 different handwriting styles, the Jekyll and Hyde personality shifts that were giving Noah emotional whiplash, and the cold, dismissive glances that even she had noticed. I pulled the small journal from my purse and pushed it across the table. I've been writing it all down, Beatrice. I feel like I'm going mad, but it's all there. Look. She put on her reading glasses and slowly turned the pages, her expression growing more serious with each entry. She read in silence for a long time, her finger tracing my script. When she finally looked up, her eyes were clear and resolute. Helen, this is more than just moodiness, she said, her voice low and firm. You are not imagining things. A woman doesn't just change which hand she writes with for fun. And the way she treats Noah. That's the most damning part. A mother's love should be a constant. What you're describing is fractured. Tears I hadn't realized I was holding back welled in my eyes. But what does it mean? Who is she? Is Isabel living a double life? Is she ill? A woman's intuition is a powerful thing, Helen, Beatrice said, squeezing my hand. And yours is screaming that something is terribly wrong. You cannot ignore it, not when your grandson's well-being is at stake. You have to find out the truth. But how? I whispered, feeling helpless. What if I confront her and I'm wrong? I could tear my family apart based on a feeling. Then you can't confront her directly, not yet, she countered, her practical nature taking over. You have to be smarter. You have to know what you're dealing with. Helen. I know this will be hard for you to hear, but I think you have to follow her. The suggestion landed like a stone in my stomach. To spy on my own daughter-in-law? It felt like a profound betrayal. I had built my life on trust and openness. This felt like descending into a world of shadows and secrets. I don't know if I can do that, Beatrice. You can, she insisted gently. You're doing it to protect Samuel and Noah. This isn't about malice, it's about protection. Find out where she goes when the cold, distant woman appears. Find out the truth, whatever it is. Her words gave me a fragile sense of purpose. She was right. I couldn't live in this fog of uncertainty, watching Noah grow more and more confused. The very next afternoon provided the opportunity. The warm Isabel had been present all morning, helping Noah with a school project, her laughter filling the house. Then, around 2 o'clock, she came downstairs wearing a simple blue dress. Helen, I'm just popping out for a bit. Need to run an errand. Her tone was light, but I noticed she was carrying a different handbag than her usual one. All right, dear, I said, my heart starting to pound. As soon as the front door clicked shut, I wrote in my journal, 2 p.m. Warm Isabel leaves. Blue dress. At 5 o'clock, she returned. But the woman who walked through the door was wearing a crisp gray pantsuit, her hair pulled back severely, her expression hard. She barely glanced at me as she walked past. "Isabel, how was your errand?" I asked, my voice trembling slightly. She stopped and gave me a cool, appraising look. "Fine," she said curtly, before continuing up the stairs. I sank into a chair, my hands shaking. I added to my journal, 5 p.m. Cold Isabel returns. Gray pantsuit. Attitude detached. It was becoming clearer. They weren't just mood swings. It was as if one person left and another returned in her place. The following Saturday, my resolve hardened. Samuel was working, and Noah was at a friend's birthday party. The house was quiet. Just after lunchtime, the woman I was beginning to think of as the imposter came downstairs. She was wearing a floral sundress and her expression was distant, her movements brusque. "I'm going out," she announced, not looking at me. "Don't expect me back for dinner." This was it. My heart hammered against my ribs, but Beatrice's voice echoed in my head. "It's about protection." I grabbed my keys and a light shawl to cover my hair, and slipped out the back door a few moments after her. Keeping a safe distance, I followed her. She didn't walk towards the boutiques on King Street or the familiar paths to her friends' houses. Instead, she headed toward the less traveled side of the city, where the grand historic homes gave way to smaller, more weathered dwellings. My breath caught in my throat as she turned down a narrow, moss-draped lane I'd never seen before. The air here was still and heavy. I ducked behind a large magnolia tree as she stopped in front of a small, clapboard house with peeling paint and a sagging porch. She knocked twice, a quick, furtive rap, and the door opened just enough for her to slip inside. I stood there for a long time, my mind racing. What was this place? Who lived here? My instinct was to march up to the door and demand answers, but fear held me rooted to the spot. The truth felt terrifyingly close, and I wasn't sure I was ready for it. Defeated and more confused than ever, I turned and walked home. My hands were clammy, my thoughts a tangled mess. As I pushed open my own front door, I froze. Standing in the kitchen, humming softly as she arranged flowers in a vase, was Isabel. She was wearing the same linen blouse with the pearl buttons she'd worn the morning of Michael's call. She looked up and gave me the warm, genuine smile I had missed so desperately. "Helen, there you are." I was beginning to worry. "Would you like some tea?" I stared at her, speechless. The woman in the floral dress had left less than an hour ago. The drive back alone would have taken 20 minutes. There was no earthly way she could have returned, changed her clothes, and be standing here so serenely arranging flowers. My carefully constructed world tilted on its axis. It wasn't one woman with two personalities. It was two women. Two completely identical women. That night, after Noah was asleep, I sat in my room, his innocent words from weeks ago echoing in my ears. "Sometimes she looks at me like she doesn't even know me." Of course she didn't. Because sometimes, she wasn't his mother. The next morning, I knew what I had to do. I couldn't live with the phantom in my house any longer. Armed with a family photograph from my mantelpiece, Samuel, Isabel, and Noah, all smiling in the sunshine of my garden, I made my way back to the narrow, moss-draped lane. The small house looked even more desolate in the morning light. A single, wilting geranium sat in a pot on the porch railing. My hand trembled as I raised it to knock. Each rap on the weathered wood echoed the frantic beating of my own heart. The door creaked open, and I found myself face to face with my own terror. It was Isabel's face, identical in every feature, but the eyes were different. These eyes were filled not with coldness or calculation, but with a deep, weary sadness and a flicker of fear. She was wearing a faded t-shirt and her hands, twisting a dish towel, were rough and chapped. My voice was barely a whisper. "Isabel?" The young woman flinched, her eyes widening in panic. She tried to slam the door, but a second voice, gentle yet firm, called out from inside. Annalise, don't. It's time. An older woman, frail and thin with wisps of white hair, appeared behind her. She leaned heavily on a cane, but her gaze was direct and surprisingly steady. You must be Helen Sterling, she said, her voice raspy. Please, come in. I think you deserve to know the truth. I stepped across the threshold into a small, sparsely furnished room that smelled of dust and medicinal ointment. An elderly man lay on a cot in the corner, his breathing shallow and ragged. The air was thick with poverty and despair. I sat down on the rickety wooden chair the woman offered, my legs feeling weak beneath me. The young woman with Isabel's face stood by the window, her back to me, her shoulders shaking. She wouldn't look at me. My name is Annalise, she said, her voice muffled. I'm sorry. I clutched the photograph in my lap. Why? I asked, my voice breaking. Why do you look just like my daughter-in-law? Why have you been in my home, pretending to be her? It was the older woman who answered. She introduced herself as Agnes, Annalise's adoptive mother. Annalise and Isabel are twins, Mrs. Sterling, she began, her voice heavy with the weight of a long-held secret. They were born to a family that couldn't afford to keep them both. Their mother was heartbroken. She made a terrible choice. She kept Isabel and gave Annalise up for adoption. I was a nurse at the hospital. I couldn't bear to see her left behind, so my husband and we took her in. We've loved her as our own ever since. I stared from Agnes to the silent, weeping girl by the window. Twins. Separated at birth. The pieces of the puzzle clicked into place with dizzying speed. The different handwriting, the shifting personalities, the uncanny resemblance. It was all horribly, tragically logical. Isabel found me a few years ago, Annalise finally whispered, turning to face me. Her eyes, so like Isabel's, were awash with shame. She found out about me somehow. At first, it was wonderful. I had a sister. But then she asked for a favor. My father, she gestured to the man on the cot, he needs medicine we can't afford. Isabel offered me money, more money than I'd ever seen. All I had to do was be her. Just for a few hours at a time, when she needed to be somewhere else. I didn't want to, but we were so desperate. I never asked where she was going. I just did what she said. I tried my best to be a good mother to Noah. I love that little boy. Her voice cracked on a sob. I'm so sorry. I never wanted to hurt anyone. My anger, which had been a raging fire, softened into a profound and aching sorrow. This young woman was not a monster. She was a victim, trapped by circumstance and exploited by her own sister. And Isabel. My Isabel. The woman I had loved like a daughter had orchestrated this entire deception. Michael's words came back to me with chilling clarity. She's in business class, sitting next to some man. Holding hands. She wasn't running errands. She wasn't out with friends. She was living another life, a secret life of wealth and infidelity, using her long-lost, impoverished twin as a pawn to maintain her perfect facade at home. The betrayal was staggering, a chasm that had opened up at my feet. I looked at Annalise, at her tear-streaked face, identical to the one in the photograph on my lap, and I saw the truth. The warm, loving mother Noah adored, the woman who hugged him tightly and praised his drawings, that was Annalise. The cold, distant stranger was my daughter-in-law, Isabel. I stood up, my resolve hardening into steel. The pain was immense, but my path was clear. This lie had gone on long enough. Annalise, I said, my voice steady despite the tremor in my hands. I don't blame you. But this has to end. For my son, and for my grandson, the truth has to come out. Will you help me? Through her tears, she looked at me, a glimmer of hope in her desolate eyes. She nodded. Yes, she whispered. I don't want to live this lie anymore. Leaving that small, sad house, I felt as if I had aged another decade. The bright Charleston sun seemed harsh and unforgiving. The charade was over. Now, I had to prepare for the storm that was about to break over my family. The hours that followed were the longest of my life. I moved through my home in a daze, the familiar rooms now feeling like a stage set for a tragedy. I had to orchestrate the revelation carefully, not for dramatic effect, but to protect Samuel and Noah from as much shrapnel as possible. That evening, I called Michael. My voice was calm, but it was the unnatural calm that precedes a hurricane. Michael, I need you to fly home. Tomorrow. And I need you to bring a copy of the flight manifest from that London trip. The one showing Isabel's name. There was a pause. Mom, what's going on? You sound. Just come home, son, I interrupted gently. It's time for everything to be brought into the light. The next day, I prepared for dinner as if it were a holiday. I used my best china, starched the linen napkins, and cooked Samuel's favorite low-country boil. I needed to create a semblance of normalcy, a final, fragile moment of peace before the world imploded. My hands moved automatically, chopping onions, stirring the pot, but my mind was miles away, rehearsing the words I would have to say. Samuel came home from work, weary but smiling when he saw the elaborate table. What's the special occasion, Mom? I just felt like we should all have a proper family meal together, I replied, my smile feeling brittle. Isabel arrived downstairs, dressed in an elegant silk blouse, looking every bit the poised, perfect wife. She surveyed the table with a pleased expression, oblivious to the abyss that was about to open beneath her. My heart ached with a strange mix of pity and fury. We sat down, the three of us, with Noah chattering happily between his parents. The scene was a perfect tableau of domestic bliss, and it was all a lie. Just as I was about to serve the meal, the doorbell rang. Isabel looked up, annoyed. Are we expecting someone? Yes, I said, my voice quiet but firm. We are. I opened the door. Michael stood on the porch, his face grim. And beside him, her hands clasped nervously in front of her, stood Annalise. I led them into the dining room. The moment Isabel saw Annalise, the color drained from her face. She shot to her feet, her chair scraping harshly against the floor. Samuel stared, his fork frozen halfway to his mouth, his eyes wide with disbelief as he looked from his wife to the identical woman standing by the door. Noah broke the stunned silence. He looked from Isabel to Annalise, his brow furrowed in childish confusion. Two mommies, he asked, his small voice full of wonder. What is the meaning of this, Helen? Isabel hissed, her voice shaking with rage. What is she doing here? I stood at the head of the table, my hands resting on the back of my chair to steady myself. Sit down, Isabel, I said. And to my surprise, she did. Slowly, painfully, I laid out the truth. I spoke of Michael's call, of the inconsistencies, of my visits to the small house on the other side of town. I told Samuel about Annalise, about the twins separated at birth, about the desperate bargain Isabel had struck to buy her silence and her compliance. You have been using your sister, a woman you should have protected, as your stand-in, I said, my voice trembling with the force of my conviction. So you could live another life. You're insane. It's all lies. Isabel shrieked, but there was panic in her eyes. Michael stepped forward and placed the flight manifest on the table. Is this a lie, Isabel? Your name, your passport number, on a flight to London the same day you were supposedly at home taking a shower. Samuel picked up the paper, his hands shaking. He looked at his wife, his face a mask of betrayal. Isabel. Tell me it's not true. She stared at him, her facade finally crumbling, replaced by a sneer of pure contempt. True? Of course it's true, she spat, her voice dripping with venom. Do you think I wanted to spend my life in this stuffy old house, playing the perfect wife to a man who's more interested in crumbling buildings than his own life? I met someone, Samuel. Someone who can give me the world. Marcus Thorne. He gives me everything you can't. Her cruel words hung in the air, devastating in their finality. Samuel flinched as if he'd been struck. Noah, sensing the raw, adult anguish in the room, began to cry, burying his face in my side. "Grandma, why is Mommy so mean?" he sobbed. I wrapped my arms around him, my own tears falling freely now. I looked at Isabel, this stranger who had lived among us, and felt nothing but a vast, empty sorrow. Annalise, who had been standing silently by the door, finally spoke, her voice soft but clear. "I didn't know, sister. I didn't know you were hurting them like this. I only wanted to help you." Isabel shot her a look of pure hatred, then turned on her heel. Without another word to her husband or her son, she walked out of the dining room, out of the house, and out of our lives. The slam of the front door echoed in the profound, heartbroken silence she left behind. In the aftermath of that terrible night, our home felt hollowed out, haunted by the ghosts of what we thought we knew. Isabel's departure was swift and absolute. A few days later, Samuel was served with divorce papers. She asked for nothing, no assets, no alimony, and most woundingly, no custody of her son. It was as if she were excising a chapter of her life she wished to forget entirely. Samuel retreated into a shell of quiet grief. He went to work, he came home, he moved through the days like a shadow of himself. But my deepest ache was for Noah. He would ask for his mommy, his small face crumpled in confusion, and my heart would break anew each time. It was Annalise who became our lifeline. She began visiting, at first tentatively, then with a quiet regularity. She didn't try to replace Isabel, she was simply herself. She brought homemade soup, knowing none of us had the heart to cook. She would sit on the floor with Noah for hours, building elaborate Lego castles and drawing pictures. She had a gentle patience that slowly, tenderly, began to soothe his wounded spirit. One afternoon, I found them in the garden. Noah was trying to explain the difference between a bumblebee and a honeybee, and Annalise was listening with rapt attention. He stumbled over a word and looked up at her. "Mommy Annalise," he said, the name coming out as naturally as breathing. "Can you help me plant these seeds?" Annalise froze, her eyes meeting mine over Noah's head. I saw a flicker of panic, then a wave of profound emotion. I gave her a small, encouraging nod. She smiled, a real, radiant smile, and knelt in the dirt beside my grandson. "Of course, my sweet boy," she said, her voice thick with unshed tears. "Let's see what we can make grow." Watching them, I felt the first true stirring of hope since the night our world fell apart. Life, I realized, was like my garden. Sometimes a blight comes and destroys a beautiful bloom, leaving a barren patch of earth. But with care and patience, something new and perhaps even more resilient can grow in its place. The seasons turned. The raw wound of Isabel's betrayal began to scar over. Samuel slowly emerged from his grief, drawn out by Noah's laughter and Annalise's quiet, unwavering kindness. I would watch them together in the evenings, talking softly on the porch swing after Noah was in bed. I saw the way Samuel looked at her, not as a replacement for the woman who had hurt him, but as the person she truly was, gentle, sincere, and full of a love he had been starved for. One spring evening, almost a year after Isabel had left, Samuel found me on the porch. He held a small, velvet box in his hand. "Mom," he said, his voice full of a nervous hope I hadn't heard in years. "I'm going to ask her. I want to build a real life with her. With your blessing." I took his hand, my heart swelling with love for my son. "Samuel, you have always had my blessing to find happiness. Annalise has already brought so much healing to this family. She belongs here." Their wedding was a small affair, held right here in my garden under the heavy boughs of the ancient live oak. Noah, impossibly proud in a tiny suit, served as the best man. Michael flew in, his smile as bright as the summer sun. As I watched Samuel place a ring on Annalise's finger, I wept, but my tears were not of sorrow. They were tears of gratitude for the unexpected, beautiful ways a family can be broken and then rebuilt, stronger and more authentic than before. Life has found its new rhythm. The house is once again filled with laughter. Annalise is a wonderful mother to Noah, and a loving, supportive wife to Samuel. She is caring for her aging adoptive parents with the resources we can now provide, bringing them a comfort they have long deserved. Sometimes, in the quiet of the evening, I sit on my porch and think about the strange, painful path that brought us here. The truth, when it came, was a destructive force, but it was also a cleansing one. It swept away the beautiful, elaborate lie and left us with the simple, unadorned truth of who we were and who we could become. It taught me that self-respect isn't about ignoring what is broken, but about having the courage to face it, and that the strongest boundaries are those we build to protect the ones we love. We lost a daughter-in-law, but we gained a daughter. And in the fertile ground of our shared sorrow, a new and truer love was given the chance to bloom.